Hey, I'm Jason, by the way. I pastor Coastline Church, Venice, Florida. I love talking about culture. I'm sort of obsessed with culture. I feel like it's one of the most overlooked things, and people don't think it's spiritual, but it actually is very spiritual. And I'll talk about that a little bit, about how spiritual it is. Everybody thinks vision is spiritual, and it is, but culture is equally as spiritual, and it really affects your church. So let's define what it is, and I'm going to try to run through this. And you guys want to do more Q&A, or you can do more talking? You just tell me. I'll talk. You want me to talk? We'll do Q&A, whatever. Because I'll talk, but I really would love to know what you're experiencing, and if something we've experienced can help. That's how that stuff works. Odds are we've had the problem or the issue, and then there's something that we can help. So. Let's talk about what culture is, and then I want to talk about how to implement it. So number one is there's three things. There's more than this, but I think there's three big pieces of a church that have to be clarified, written down, and have to be really, really strong. Number one is your purpose, and purpose is your why. Like, why do you exist? So I'll give you our purpose, just so you have an example. The purpose of our church is we exist to lead people to abundant life in Christ. We based our church off of John 10, Coast Life. Jesus came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. So purpose is your why. Why are you there? Why are you in the community? What is the mission of your church? What is the purpose of your church? You have to make it clear, write it down. We exist to lead people to abundant life in Jesus Christ. If you have a comma in your purpose statement, it's too long. If you have a conjunction in your purpose statement, it's too long. Short. 10 words or less. To lead people to abundant life in Christ. I didn't intend to go into all that. Okay. The second thing, that's purpose equals why. If you're taking notes, purpose equals why. Vision equals where. It's where you want to go. Vision isn't who you are, it's where you want to go, right? It's like, this is the church we're dreaming about being. Like, this is what we're wanting to do. It's where. So then what is culture? So purpose equals one, vision equals where, culture equals how. And one of the things that we sometimes don't answer is the how question. We know why we exist. I mean, I think that's pretty easy as a church. In some way, it's to reach people for Jesus, right? I mean, like we may say that in a million different ways, but every church has the same mission. It's to reach people for Jesus, like to see people get saved. A lot of churches are going to share a similar vision. It's to grow. It's to influence the community. It's to expand. It's to reach out. There's always vision, but I think one of the things that people overlook is the culture piece, and that's the how. How are you going to fulfill what it is that God's called you to do? Is this making sense so far? Yeah. So let's give it some handles. Culture is to a church what a personality is to a person.
Mm-hmm. Wow. You say that again?
Culture is to a church what a personality is to a person. When somebody comes up to you, they experience your presentation to them. That's your personality.
That's good, man.
And I found out some about churches and people is people who don't pay attention to their personality usually have the worst. You know what I mean? Like, that's just me. That's just who I am. Well, who you are is a jerk. Nobody wants to be around you. And that's what happens in churches. That's just who we are. Well, nobody wants to come experience that. So, like when we talk about working on our personality, we talk about that self-awareness, like becoming aware of what people are experiencing when they experience you. It's being able to see from the inside how people connect with you from the outside, right? That's what a culture is to the church. We get so used to being in a church, we don't know what it's like to experience us.
Yeah.
That's culture. Culture is the unseen thing that you experience and feel when you go to a place. Mm-hmm. And every place has a culture.
Yeah.
Like some have a great culture, some don't have a great culture. Like well, I get into trouble when I start naming stores, but there's certain stores I don't like to go into just because I don't like the culture. Like, I would rather spend more at someplace else just because it's a much better environment. Like, I'd rather go to certain places just because of the culture. It's what you experience. And so churches oftentimes just lean into vision. But this is a John Maxwell statement that he stole from somebody else. Culture eats vision for lunch.
Wow.
Because it doesn't matter where you're saying you're going, how you're doing it is killing you.
Wow.
And this is a great book to read by a guy named Pastor Kevin Gerald. But it's a statement, and it's this. And this is what I want to spend our time talking about. Every church has a culture either by design or by default.
Yeah.
Like, it has one. It's just, are you going to design it or are you going to let it happen by default?
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about that for a little bit, because here's how culture is mostly developed in churches. Culture is what people experience when they come to the church, and what they experience is based on the person who's there and how they feel that day. Mm-hmm. So if Sister Susie is there and she likes to do it this way and that's the way it goes, then that's what people experience. Mm-hmm. If somebody else is there, then it experienced differently based on who is there in the room that day. And what you have to do is you have to understand that you either have a default culture, and that's just whoever is there, whatever their personal opinion is in that moment and how they think it should go, that's what people are going to experience. Or you can design it by designing what it is that people experience, not just on a weekend, but every facet of the way throughout your church, because culture isn't just shaped on Sunday, it's shaped all throughout the week as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And you have to wrestle with this. Somebody's going to create the culture of your church. Because it's a non-negotiable. People are going to feel something. They're going to experience something when they come to our churches. So we have to define it. And so last illustration, then we're going to go on. A lot of times churches are fired up about vision because vision is biblical and vision is powerful. Amen, somebody? Without a vision, people perish.
Yeah.
But what vision is like a powerful race car. It's going to take you somewhere. It's the direction that you're going. We want to run fast. So that's vision. But here's culture. Culture is the steering wheel. And what happens is a lot of times we start a church, we step on the gas of vision, but we don't put a steering wheel on it to say, this is how we're going to keep it from going into the ditches.
Amen.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to get there. I want to show it to you from the Bible. David had a vision of bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, right? He wanted the Ark of the Covenant had been in this guy's garage for 20 years. He wanted to bring it to Jerusalem. The why was because he wanted the presence of God in Jerusalem, blessing his nation under his leadership. He had the right why. He had the right vision. He had the right purpose, the right vision. And then as they're coming to bring the Ark of the Covenant back, you guys know the story. The oxen stumbles, right?
Yeah.
The guy Uzzah reaches out his hand, touches the Ark of God. He dies. And David is upset. And I want to read the verse that he says, 1 Chronicles 13 and 12. Watch this. David was afraid of God that day, and he said, how can I bring the Ark of God home to me? David had the right purpose. David had the right vision. David had the wrong how. Mm-hmm. And when we don't have the right how, people get hurt.
Yeah.
We have to define it. David spent 90 days defining not just where he wanted to go and why he wanted to do it. David spent 90 days defining the how he was going to do it. And ultimately ended up being putting the Ark of the Covenant on the priest's shoulders. And that means that leaders in our church aren't just people who perform a task. Leaders in our church are people who carry culture, who carry the how. They carry how it is that we do it. Because I really believe this. I believe God isn't just interested in where you're going. I believe God's interested in how you're going to get there as well. And so leaders are culture creators and culture carriers. And culture is clarifying and fighting for how. And if you don't design it, it will be created by default. Culture travels on language, but it's exemplified in action. So let's say it this way. You can write down your culture, and that identifies it, but that doesn't create culture. Because you can't create culture, you can only be culture. Does that make sense? So let me do this. So in every organization, in every church, there are stated values and there are unstated values. There's the things that we say, but then there's the things that we do.
Yeah.
So like on a church, we would put on the website, we love people. We love people. We're all about people. But when you go to the church, there's nobody to greet you. The place is a mess. The service didn't start on time. We don't really value your time. Nobody planned for you to be there that day. The message is condemning. It's not life-giving. So our stated value is we love people. Our unstated value is not that much.
Oh, come on.
Like stated value, unstated value. And a healthy culture is when you close the gap between your stated values and your unstated values.
Amen.
Craig Rochelle says it best. He said, like you ever go into church, we have this, we have our values up on our wall. That's your culture. Culture travels on language. You write down your values. That's how you're going to do it. Craig Rochelle says, what happens in the halls trumps what's written on the walls.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty smart. So we put it on the wall, but what's happening in the hall? That's where you identify it by writing it down, but then you have to be the culture. You have to exemplify it. And so it's closing the gap. Culture isn't formed by a workbook or even a code. It's simply being the culture. One of our values is we pursue excellence. And we have 3 buildings on our campus, and one of them we were using for leadership training. And leadership training had been going on for weeks, and I hadn't been in that building in a while. And I walked in, and there's probably 20 lights in that building, can lights. And I walked in and I counted, and I think 5 or 6 of them were burned out light bulbs. We're teaching excellence. And we've got a room full of leaders and nobody's changing the light bulb.
Wow.
Stated value, unstated value. Like the better thing would have been to stop teaching excellence and just taught people when you walk into a room and the light bulb's out, let's change the light bulb.
Yeah. Come on. Preach it.
So it has to come from written values, because if you don't write it down, then it can't travel.
Yeah.
It has to be communicated. That's how you identify it. But the way that it gets implemented is you exemplify it. And then culture then isn't something you say, it's something that you are.
Mm-hmm.
And leaders in your church are not the people that do tasks. Leaders are the people who carry culture. Those are the influencers. And listen, when it comes to culture, the devil really is in the details.
Mm-hmm.
Again, another example is we run Growth Track. It's the way that we allow people to join our church. It's a 3-week process. And so we go through who we are. Again, one of our values is Church of Excellence. We're sitting there talking about who we are as a church, and I walk out into the lobby, and there's a break where everybody can come get desserts and cookies and stuff before they go in for another session. And I walk out, and there's a tray with crumbs on it, no cookies. And I'm watching leaders just stand there, and I go over and I'm like, where's the cookies? I'm like, well, we ran out. People already grabbed them. And I'm like, well, we're going to announce that there's cookies in the lobby. Mm-hmm. So all of these people are going to come out. Listen, what we just taught doesn't matter if that tray's empty.
Yeah.
It's in the details. Because what people experience is what's training them as to what's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay. Is this helpful so far?
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep going.
You don't create culture from a stage. Everybody thinks that they're going to get up and I'm just going to say this and then it's going to get created. Again, it's like you identify it from a stage, but it gets created when people experience it and it begins to get exemplified. And this is really important. This is the difference between a design culture and a default culture. Is if you don't write down and empower people who exemplify your culture, your church will be based on, your church is either based on one or two things. It's based on shared values or it's based on personal opinions? When somebody comes and they experience your greeting team, did you design it and everybody is agreeing to the shared values? Or is the way it functions based on the opinion of the people that are there that day?
Wow.
And what happens in church a lot of times is leaders are just the people who have the strongest, most vocal opinions. And the way that you design a culture is to say, we are going to lay all of our preferences and opinions down, and we're going to agree to a shared set of values
Yes.
that not only do we know where we're going and why we're here, but this is how we're going to do it, and we're going to create unity around this, because the reality is our church has become fractured and disunified because it's based on the opinions of a few, and it's not based on the shared values of everybody saying we're going to lay down our preferences so that we can hold this set of values, because at our church, this is how we love and serve people.
Preach it, bro.
So, default is somebody shows up, they run it a certain way. Somebody else shows up, they run it a certain way. Design is, we're going to write it down every step of the way, and this is the heavy lifting, okay? That's the heavy lifting. One more example, and then I'm going to take you through a couple of practical things. We have our teams come, they're there before church, and all of the teams huddle, right? So kids team huddles, production huddles, worship huddles, ushers huddle, prayer team huddles, welcome team, parking team, all of these teams get together, every service, huddle, and we've designed that. We don't let somebody just step in and do that. We design it. There's a little format to follow. You share one of our values. We have 10 values of our church. You share one of our values. You teach on it. Then you give information. What do they need to know that day? We inform our teams before we inform our church. So if there's things going on, we let the team know before the church knows, so they're equipped to answer questions that day. Because not everybody goes to the Connect Center or Welcome Desk. You just need to know how to, like, somebody asks a question, here's what you need to know. And then we're going to pray over all of the people that are gathering in a room that day. This was just a few weeks ago. I'm sitting talking to somebody, and I overhear one of our huddles, and there's not a leader there. And they talk politics for like 5 minutes and then pray over some political event that's happening in our country. And I'm like, that's off the rails right there. We don't have a culture carrier. We don't have a leader. They showed up, they talked politics because that was what somebody's opinion was that day.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to get down into the details of, we're going to design every step of the way so that our personal opinions are lowered, so that we can all be unified around one mission, one vision, and one set of values. It's a value statement and then a description. So we have a purpose, is to lead people to abundant life in Christ. That's our why. This is our how. So there's 10 statements and 10 descriptions. Value statement, it's all about Jesus. Description, it's all from Him, through Him, and to Him. The name of Jesus is our main motivation, not a church name, not a religion, not a denomination. We are a Jesus people. And we did that because everybody wanted to know what kind of church is this, and we just started to say, we're a Jesus church. So if you have an agenda, this isn't the place for you. We lay our agendas down for one name, the name of Jesus. Second value statement, we're a coaching culture. We desire feedback, and our heart is to be developed through coaching. We just wanted to create a teachability in our church. We wanted to be hungry for growth. We wanted to just have a desire to get better and better. So we just identified that we wanted to be a coaching culture. So everybody knows that whatever happens, it's going to be evaluated, and we're going to get coached on it later. And so every weekend, there's Slack channels where people are evaluating what happened that weekend, because we just want to get coached and we want to get better and better. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Value statement, we're a team church. The priority of Jesus was to build His team. We're better together when we work, when we meet, when we serve. Our impact is exponentially greater when we go together. Purpose statement, we pursue excellence. The description is we go the extra mile. Excellence is how we love people. We go above and beyond in everything we do because people and God deserve our best. So we make the statement, then we define what that looks like. Heart for the house, that's our value statement. We serve people the way that we serve God, by serving others. We relentlessly pursue progress. We're committed to advancing the kingdom of God everywhere and everything at all times. Value statement, we believe big. We serve a big God. We will not limit him with small thinking. We won't let small thinking limit what a big God can do. We approach each week with expectation that fuels our preparation. We are people of unreasonable faith. Value statement. We honor all around. Everyone gets better with honor. Honor is the way we recognize the value in one another. We choose joyfully to submit to those God has placed over us. We honor and care for those that God has placed under us. Value statement. This is the 9th one. We choose joy. We choose joy regardless of circumstances. The byproduct of joy is enjoying the journey and having fun. And then the final one is we express generosity. We live with an open hand and a big heart. Generosity makes our world larger. So we wrote it down. We defined it. Now let's talk about how that plays out. So you got to define your how. This is how we're going to do it. And then you've got to design how that's going to look in every step of the way through your church. That's in your pre-service meetings. That's in your small groups. That's in your rooms. All of it has to be designed. And then here's how we implement it. Is one is we teach it, but in two is this is how you're going to lead your church. And so values become two things. It becomes what you celebrate and it becomes what you correct. So we're never going to celebrate somebody outside of our values. So whenever we say good job, we're going to say good job because you exemplified what it's like to have a heart for the house.
Yeah.
So at our team meeting, when we're wanting to recognize somebody and we've got the $10 Starbucks gift card, we're not going to give them the $10 Starbucks gift card and just say you did a good job. We're going to say, hey, you expressed what it meant to have a heart for the house when you did this, and you were serving people, but you were serving God, so here's a $10 Starbucks gift card. It's also what we correct, because without stated values, you become schizophrenic in what you correct. It's based on what somebody doesn't like instead of what we've agreed to share our values on.
Yeah, that's good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when we correct somebody, we're going to correct based on our values. Because otherwise it's just a personal opinion of somebody who showed up and I didn't like that, so I'm a leader, so I'm going to tell you I didn't like that. Like, don't ever wear that shirt again, that's ugly. Well, how do we de-elevate that? We've got to write it down. We've got to make it clear for somebody. So the other day we were planning an event, and I walked into the auditorium, and I was believing God. These are numbers, so forgive me. That we have a little over 300 people on our dream team. That's people who serve in our church. And we were having an event, and I was wanting at least 200 of them in the room. And we're believing for growth because Jesus taught us don't pray for the harvest. He taught us to pray for laborers for the harvest. And so that's what we're leaning into. And I walked into the room. I'm believing God for more than 200 people. They have the room set up for 140 people. And it's tables and chairs. And you can't fit 200 people in the room that we're having this event in with tables and chairs. And so we've got a decision to make. I'm either going to correct this, and we're going to spend the whole afternoon moving tables and chairs and bringing different chairs in, or I'm going to let it go. What do you think I did? I corrected it.
Yeah.
And I said, we're big faith people.
Yeah.
That's our value, is that we're believing God for more. And so why are we going to set up a room when we're believing God for 200, maybe even 300? Why would we set up a room for 140 people?
Yeah.
That's good.
So what am I correcting based on my opinion?
No.
No, I'm correcting based on what we've all agreed to, that this is who we are as a church. And then my leadership then isn't to say what I like or dislike, is to carry and exemplify the culture for what we're doing that day. And so we spent an agonizing afternoon unloading chairs and tables, bringing in chairs and tables, and we had 200 people in the room that night.
Yeah.
So it's what you celebrate, it's what you correct. You got to design it, you got to write it down, and you got to empower people who don't do tasks, but they exemplify culture. And it gets infectious. We were having a leadership, I'm going to take questions right after this. We were having a leadership meeting the other day, and this guy he's one of our leaders in our church. He's been in one of the lower levels of leadership, but he's rising. He's been in our church in a long time, and I've never seen this from him. One of our deals is we choose joy, And we have other ways that we clarify. We have our values, which I just read to you, and then we have our sounds and our standards. And one of our standards is we're a loud church. We're just going to be loud. We're loud. And so, like, my leaders are people who are loud, and we call it being a thermostat, not a thermometer. You know what I mean? Like, it's a pretty common saying, but we don't want people to walk in the room and take the temperature. We want leaders who will walk in the room and set the temperature. And we have a leaders huddle. It happens in my office on Saturday night before the teams huddle. All the leaders get together, and this guy, like, he kind of reserved. You met it, like, leaders in the room. All of a sudden, the door busts open. And he goes, "It's Vision Weekend! It's Vision Weekend! It's Vision Weekend!" And the temperature in the room just goes from here to here. And I'm like, he just got it.
Yeah, amen. Yeah.
He just got it. Like, in the past 3 weeks, it was because he's exempling the leader above him.
Yeah.
Because that's how the leader above him does it when he walks in a room. Like, he walks in designing the culture. Is this helpful?
That's great.
Awesome.
So you got to write it down. I wouldn't recommend. It's hard to do more than 10. After so many, nobody can remember them. I had to read my own values because I can't even remember them. You got to keep it short, but you got to boil it down to clarifying the how, and then you've got to put it into the hearts of people, and then the people that have that are then the leaders that are exemplifying it. So that when people come to our church, what they experience is consistent week to week, and we know what the experience is. Because I really believe that one of the reasons people don't bring people to church is because they've been embarrassed of their church, and they're afraid if they invite their friends or family, they don't know what they're going to get.
Yeah.
And I just think what we owe people, if they're going to bring their friends and family, I think we owe them this to
Yeah.
guarantee.
Amen.
If you get somebody here, it's going to be an amazing experience for them when they walk through the doors.
Yeah.
The way that we serve their children, when they walk in the bathrooms aren't going to be better than the auditorium. Like, the same standard of excellence is going to be in every part of our facility, our church, our culture. Like, if they go to a small group, they're not going to step into a smaller group and it's creepy and Sunday music. You want to lead?
Yeah.
Like, you got to design. Like, if they join a team, what kind of team are they? Are they stepping into some political thing, or are they stepping into, hey, this is who we are as a church, this is where we're going? You got to design all of that stuff. Is that all right?
Yes.
Questions?
So, the church that I'm one of the pastors at, we came from a very negative culture that we are no longer part of. And it's such a hard thing because we were so used to that culture, and we're trying to establish a completely different culture, and this is who we are. And we just I feel like we're almost stuck in a rut of how can we establish this when everybody who's attending here is so used to that. What would be your first, what you think would be our first thing that we should establish culturally throughout the church as leaders of the church? How would you get a plan into motion to be like, we were that, we are no longer that, this is who we are, and this is who we will be, this is what we expect. How would you put a plan in motion to get to where we need to be?
So a culture attracts and repels. A healthy culture attracts the right people and repels the wrong people. So it's like the magic force field of your church. And when you have a clearly defined culture, it communicates to people, either it allows them to make the choice, I want to be involved here or I don't want to be involved here. And so I don't know where you're at in the journey, but the first thing that I would do is write down the how. Like, clearly identify, this is who we are. And because without having it written down, then how do you go to people and say, that's not our culture? I think that's the hardest thing in the world to do, is to identify. Like, and we've written it down, and even still sometimes, it's difficult for us to articulate, hey, that's not us, that's not who we are. But at least if you write it down, you can start having the conversations, because you have to fight for culture, and there's no way to have a healthy culture without learning how to have healthy conflict.
Yeah.
And that's where, then what are you going to have conflict with people over? What are you going to say, hey, you're included, or that's not included? How are we going to attract or repel? Well, one is it has to be written down. Two is I do believe that it has to be stated Like you can identify it from the stage. Like you've got to say, this is who we are. We do that at Growth Track. So we start week 1. This is who we are as a church. We lay out all of our mission, our vision, our values. We lay out all of that stuff. That allows people to determine, yeah, that's a church I want to be a part of, or no, I don't want to be a part of that church. Attracts and repels. And then from that, then it becomes coaching, right? Like, hey, we've all agreed that this is who we're going to be. What you're doing doesn't line up with what that is.
Yep.
And so I think 1 is you got to write it down. 2 is you do have to communicate it somewhere. But then 3 is you just got to be it.
Mhm.
Like you got to go be it. And when somebody's not being it, then it has to get confronted. Does that make sense?
That makes 100% sense. That's great. Great stuff.
And it's hard to change culture. One of the things that I've established at our church is if we don't have a leader for it, we won't do it. Y'all may throw me out, but we're nixing our prayer team right now. And we're still gonna pray for people.
Yeah.
But we're nixing the prayer team because we don't have a leader. And the huddle that I heard with all the political mess was the prayer team. And so we're just shutting it down because we don't have a leader that can carry our culture. So we're just not going to do it. So a few of our leaders are going to cover the prayer thing for a little while until we identify a leader that can exemplify our culture.
Wow.
And then once we have that, then we'll start doing it again.
That's great.
So if we can't have a leader that carries who we are, then we just won't do it.
That's good.
Wow, that's good.
Question for you. So as you grow, like culture is like huge in every organization, even like a church. As you grow and get bigger, have you found it to be difficult to keep like your hand on or your eye on making sure the culture stays the same? And what do you do to try to like safeguard that culture as you grow and get bigger and you can't be in the halls all the time?
So that's where leadership development becomes crucial because you got to have people who can take the temperature. They can step in the room and know that's either us or it's not us. And one of the biggest failures and wins was we do a monthly event called I Love My City, and we rally at the church, and then everybody goes out to serve projects around the community. So we'll line up. So I popped in. I don't normally go to it because I don't love my city. But
I got myself.
First of all, your leadership isn't determined when you're there. Your leadership is determined when you're not there.
Yeah, that's good.
And if it's going the way that you've laid it out when you're not there, that's when you know your leadership's working.
Yeah, that's good.
So anyway, I popped in because my wife and I wanted to go serve somewhere.
Yeah.
So like we're gonna go serve at our church. I had no role there. I just went. It went off the rails, and so it took me a couple of weeks to get with the leader, and I'm like, hey man, we need to talk about this. And he texted me, and he was like, yeah, the girl who leads it sent, and she had bullet pointed everything that went wrong that day.
Yeah.
And she already saw it. Said, I'm sorry. I'm gonna fix it. It's not that it has to be perfect. It's just there has to be a leader taking the temperature, saying, "Hey, that's not going to happen anymore. We're on it." And so that's where leadership development becomes crucial. So we have growth. We do our values at Growth Track, so that people already are introduced to it. But then we do, before we put somebody in leadership, we have leadership track, and we teach our sounds. So those are phrases that we use because culture travels on language. So one of the things people do is make excuses. So this is a sound. This is the type of a sound, is we cut the lock. We have this metal shed a storage shed, and we're forever losing the key. I don't one is we need to improve our excellence and just have a place for the freaking key. But then do we just make an excuse like, oh, we can't get in there today? Or do we get some bolt cutters and just cut the lock? Well, like 5 times we just cut the lock. Like, I will burn the place down. We're gonna do what we set out to do, and we're not gonna make excuses.
Amen.
So like one of our overseers was preaching for us, and so Saturday night he had his notes, and Sunday morning he was like, "Hey, I want to change something on the screens," and I'm like, "Okay, send it into media, we'll get it done." So he sent it in, and they came back and said the internet went down. We can't make the change, and I'm like, make the change.
Yeah.
And I'm like, take the computer, unplug it, go to Starbucks where there's free Wi-Fi, download the email, bring it back. I'm like, or the simpler thing is somebody create a hotspot on your phone. I'm not going to accept the excuse that we can't do it because the internet's down.
Right.
We're going to cut the line.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it just gets infused into. But we wrote that down.
Yeah.
So we have our statements. We have our standards. Our standards are things like we're hands free. Like no, you'll never see anybody on our team holding a phone or a coffee cup. We just feel like that's not inviting. If I've got my coffee and I've got my phone, it's not being ready for you.
Yeah.
Eyebrows up. That's one of our standards.
Yeah.
If you're looking down, somebody will come along and say, "Hey, eyebrows up." We're ready for people
Yeah.
when they're walking on our property. Our hands are free, our eyebrows are up. Think three. Talk to 3 new people today about where they're at on their journey with Christ and what their next step is.
Yeah.
And it infuses your culture.
That's good.
Awesome.
But you've got to train the leaders, and that's why leaders aren't people who do tasks. Leaders are people who carry your culture.
Yes.
Because what always happens in churches is somebody thinks, "Oh, I'm the whatever," this is my job. Hospitality is to make coffee. No, actually, the leader of the hospitality is if you're making coffee, you will get fired from a volunteer position because that's not your job. Your job is to build the team and exemplify the culture.
Great, man.
That's great.
It's like a 2-part. One is a little personal. So I had the pleasure and honor of being able to attend your church, and you guys do absolutely walk that culture out. And so your testimonies that you came to that church with 14 people, is that a culture you established from the beginning, or did you find yourself having to reevaluate and?
No, yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, that's an awesome question. No, Heidi and I didn't know who we were when we started the church. We were broken.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the miracle of our church is that somehow God still breathed on it.
Absolutely.
But here's what I'll tell you, is every time we defined our culture, our church grew.
Awesome. Okay.
Let me give you some statistics on that first. Is anytime you make this is really important. Anytime you make a cultural change in a church, you'll lose 15 to 20% of your people.
Because it doesn't fit there. Okay.
Because, they've been used to infusing their opinion into your church, and when you define culture, you take their opinion away. They walk
Yeah.
Wow.
15 to 20%. You see all of the negative effects of change in the first 90 days. And I learned this from a class. I've lived this for the past 9 years. I can take you back and show you on spreadsheets where this has happened, where our church has declined. But the positive results are you'll see 40 to 50% increase, but it's going to take 9 months to a year.
Yeah.
And so what happens is people step into this and there's all this immediate pushback. People are leaving the church. Oh no, we've made a mistake. Culture attracts and repels. You've just shifted the culture. So the people that were attracted to the broken culture now no longer are attracted to it. And it feels like you're being exclusive, but you're actually being inclusive because you're saying no to those people, but you're saying yes to a whole bunch more people who can get involved into the healthy culture of your church. And so you got to know that. That's where the confrontation. I got so sick of seeing tissue boxes in my office that I just asked, can somebody get rid of these? Because I am so tired of having confrontation meetings and people crying in my office because I'm a huge jerk. But you have to fight for it. And that's the reality is you got to fight for it. You got to step in those moments and those environments and say, that's not us. We've agreed on this. This is who we are. And I think when you clarify that, it's going to, some leaders are not going to be able to take that journey. Obviously, in your heart, you've got to create every pathway for people to take the journey with you. But you've got to know some people aren't going to take the journey towards health with you. They're going to stay stuck there. But then that's where Andy Stanley says we make decisions based on the wrong people. We make decisions based on the people that are in the room, but we don't make decisions for the people who aren't in the room yet.
So that leads me to pretty much the second part was you came into a culture, you come into a church, you're taking over, you come into a culture where the mentality of the vision or how the ministries ran was a positive one where it's giving people ownership,
Mhm.
saying, if you own it, you're going to want to do it, and so on. But the problem is that multiple ministries start looking completely different. They can almost be different churches.
Right.
You know what I mean? So when you come in and you adjust that culture, or you set it, you write it, and so on, is it pretty much those that are on board, you allow them to be on board, and you make as many paths as you can, but those that just are too much of their agenda or their ownership of their ministry, they fall out? I mean, what do you do in that manner?
Yeah, that's where you got to find your courage, and you got to set some standards that it doesn't matter what environment you're in. These are our standards are our standards, and I think that's the challenge as the church grows. That's why churches get stuck.
Yeah,
is because they can't duplicate culture, and I think that's the challenge as the church grows, is you have more and more people. But then you have this fractured default thing where this leader does it this way and this leader does it this way, and you're actually disunified. And then somebody goes to this ministry or this team and they have one experience, then they go to another and they get a different experience. And so that's where clarifying it and designing it from the top down. And we fought that battle. We had a teacher that came in and painted her room because it was her room. And it was like, it's not your room, it's our church.
Yeah.
So you're not going to paint your room. We are going to design the way our children's facility looks, and whether they're dropping their baby off in nursery or they're dropping their elementary kid off in the Legends room, they're going to feel the same thing. And so no, we're not going to let you have your opinion over your room. And that's where who you empower to be a leader has to carry the heart of the house.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then they start leading out of their opinion instead of the shared values of our church. And that's where there's a million hard conversations.
Yeah.
And that's why churches get stuck. Like somebody's got somebody on the worship team that can't sing, but nobody can tell them they can't sing. Is that accurate? Somebody's got a leader that's got an attitude problem, but they've been in leadership for so long, nobody will go deal with them.
Yeah.
And that's where somebody told me a long time ago that church growth is based on how much pain you can endure.
Wow.
And it hurts. Nobody wants to hurt. Nobody wants to count the cost, pay the price, and say, listen, I gotta quit. But I just taught this to our team. Jesus, his own family came to him one day and said, Jesus, stop talking to those people and come back home with us. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, these are my brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
The ones who do the will of God. And I think you've got to define who your brothers and sisters are. And a long time ago, I just defined, hey, I love you, but if you don't want to go the direction we want to go, I'm just going to go with the people that want to go.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to take that journey, that's your choice.
That's so good.
But my brothers and sisters are the people who are going to do the will of God.
Yes.
We're gonna walk this together.
That's right. That's good.
All right, love you guys.